Just a quick warning before you start this episode of Essential Experience. One of the primary topics is substance abuse, and that can be a challenging topic for a lot of people. So just wanted to let you know ahead of time so there's no surprises. Enjoy. Hello, the KidVarg. Is it the KidVarg?
I think it might be. I think it might be actually.
You sound very certain.
It's KidVarg, that one dude who plays Disco Elysium and retweets a fuck ton about it. A ridiculous amount
pretty much all
about
you
it.
retweet.
Yeah, it's just Disco Elysium art, quotes, and none of it makes sense to anyone but me. And I'm just fangirling hard over it.
If that's not what Twitter is for, I don't know what it is.
Exactly. Non-contextual fangirling.
Exactly. If no one else gets it, you're doing it right. It's just like Tumblr, but a different
Yes.
website.
Yeah, let's all migrate to Tumblr. Let's all go back.
But they got rid of all the porn.
That is true.
Yeah.
That's the one thing Twitter has over Tumblr at the moment.
Otherwise, they're pretty much exactly the same.
You reckon if they allowed it, Twitter would lose a large majority of its user base? I feel like it would.
No, I don't think so. I think the Twitter interface on both desktop and mobile is much nicer than Tumblr's.
True. No, I'd have to agree with you
Yeah.
there, actually.
And I think Tumblr's also well dead already.
Also true. That's why my old Tumblr account is just like tumbleweeds on my
Same,
timeline.
yeah. I haven't logged in ages. I have no idea. Last time I logged in, and that was like 4 years ago, it was dead as fuck. So anyway, so what have you brought to the table today?
One day I was just like in the mood to kind of try something new, maybe something a little different, because up until this point, I would say the main game I would play and would talk about a lot is like Fallout New Vegas.
Yeah.
And I was looking for something along the same elements, because again, like when I played New Vegas, it was a game that really resonated with me. I was much younger when I played it, but to have kind of my own agency as a player, I really enjoyed that. So when I saw Disco Elysium in the store, I saw that it sold itself as a detective RPG, but from like all the reviews and stuff that I had seen like on the Steam store, it seemed to be
A lot more than that, yeah.
it seemed to be a lot more than that. It was a game that made you think about stuff that you might not have thought about otherwise. So as soon as I saw it, I think it might have been in early access at this point, or it had just dropped, so it was fairly buggy. It wasn't in its final rendition, because it got like an update that recently put in some new quests and maybe refined some of the dialogue and how quest lines are completed and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, yeah, I just saw it on the store and I was like, you know what? There's something about this game right now, without having even played it, that resonates with me already. So I bought it at full price, and
That's a compelling feeling.
yeah.
Like, just looking at it, you're like, yes.
Yeah. I haven't been able to put it down, pretty much, or stop talking about it since. Because, like, again, those times on Discord where you just saw me fucking do a Disco Elysium dump of just art or
Oh,
quotes.
God, I love the disco art. It is so good. Kind of like Dishonored, but more painterly.
Yes.
Like the art in Dishonored, like the paintings that you steal in Dishonored. That's the vibe I
So
get.
good, so good. I love those paintings so much. I love the concept art, and even like looking at like concept art pieces of Disco Elysium before I bought the game, it just seemed different in a really good way. So I bought it full price, and I've been through the early renditions of the game, and I've played it at its current form now, which is like the final cut, as it calls itself. And I've enjoyed both versions. But yeah, that was my personal experience in encountering Disco Elysium for the first time. For context, and people who don't know about Disco Elysium, it's a detective RPG where you play as a detective, and essentially how the story goes is you have come off an incredibly self-destructive bender, is one way to put it, which involved alcohol, drugs, self-destructive behavior that kind of makes everyone think you're a monster.
So just a regular Tuesday night in Vegas.
Yes, exactly. Except it's been amplified, and it's horrifying to even think about, especially once some of the people confront you about it in the game. But anyway, you wake up with no recollection of who you are or the basic concepts of the reality you're in, so that's nice. It's something that plays quite a prevalent part in both the gameplay and the story. The drug abuse, the drinking, um, as a character that has no correct recollection of either of those things, you are still a recovering addict per se. You can choose as the player to engage in that behavior again, or to essentially go cold turkey. I think that's the two distinct play styles of the game. You can dabble a bit in and out, and then decide later on, oh yeah, this is not how I want the character to go. But regardless, there's two distinct ways to play, I would say, and that's as someone who's engaging in that self-destructive behavior again, or going cold turkey, like I said before. Anyway,
Yeah.
mechanically, the game does reward you in the short term by giving you stat bonuses that will help affect your rolls, especially if you're having a particularly tough time of engaging with the story or making those rolls to actually progress in the ways that you want to. So at the start of the game, your stats are low. You're suffering from all these negative effects. People are not giving you a chance already because they've seen your previous behavior, and it's the option to take drugs or to drink is always there, like itching in the back of your head. Even if you don't engage in that behavior at all, the option is still available to you, and it makes itself known that it's there to choose every single time you come at a crossroads.
And I think that's like a really strong narrative, because I mean, one of my friend's dads has been sober for like 25 years or something now. And for some people, going sober is not that big a deal. And for other people, even 25 years down the line, it is still a very, very strong urge that you really have to fight.
It is a conscious effort to not go that way again.
Yeah.
And the same can be said for like in Disco Elysium. It's like even once you reach the end of the game, you're still confronted with the fact that things would be so much easier for your character, like to engage with the state of things if he was high or drunk. Even at times where your volition will kick in and say that, no, this is actually good for you to stop this now. You have a plethora of characters that know you for the person that you were and will not believe in you and will judge you regardless of whether you've been sober or not. They'll still think of you as a drunk. So it's like, well, what the fuck is the point? Like,
You've already been labeled as such, so you're not...
Yeah.
It's not only the struggle of escaping it in your own head, but also through the perception of everyone else.
And it's like, why get better when everyone already thinks, oh yeah, you are that one self-destructive freak that trashed his room and passed out and did all these things. For me, in terms of gameplay, I would say it was very engaging to me as the player to not engage with those behaviors, because as you play through the game, like I said before, you have low stats, everything's kind of against you from the beginning. There is the one thing that you can control, and that's whether you take drugs or not, or you drink or not. So out of all these things where I have like percentage chances to succeed or not, that was the one thing I could actually control all of the time. And for me, that was like a victory in of itself to get to the end of the game without using that as a last resort and just rolling with the punches, which I think opens up interesting avenues of gameplay that you might not experience having taken, I guess, essentially the easy way through. Because you have to accept the fact that there are parts of the game you're not going to see. There are going to be characters who you mess up conversations with or your relationships with. And I think that really punches with the themes of failure and loss, but also rebirth that Disco Elysium, well, I personally feel that Disco Elysium carries those themes quite strongly.
Right. And you were saying though, like, there are bits of the game that you're not going to see. Like a lot of RPGs, if you choose a particular route, you're not going to see that aspect of the game. You've played a good chunk of Disco Elysium. I mean, you played it when you first started streaming, getting your confidence up, trying to speak more on camera and being more comfortable with that.
Exactly.
And that first playthrough on stream, I don't know if that was your first ever playthrough or just your first on stream, but what was that like compared to now you've played it a few times, and what different aspects come out with different, I guess, attitudes?
It was my second playthrough on stream, so I kind of knew what to expect, but still I didn't engage in that kind of playstyle at all. It's one thing that's remained prevalent to me.
In all of your playthroughs?
In all of my playthroughs is I usually go the cold turkey route, because I think while it might not be realistic to, you know, just pick up the pieces and kind of just decide to quit years of drinking and partaking in drugs and all that kind of stuff.
But that's your sort of personal alignment.
Yeah, that was my personal alignment, and it was like something that resonated with me, I guess, strongly enough in my first playthrough to be something that sticks with me in all my other playthroughs going forward, regardless of like what kind of playstyle I choose in terms of the stats that I go with at the beginning. That was one thing that had stuck with me. I will say that I guess now with the context of some of the other characters' backstories as well as their previous experiences with the protagonist of Disco Elysium, it's easier to understand why that they hold such a negative view of your protagonist, because up until the point that your character like essentially loses all sense of himself, he seemed to be this very self-destructive person who kind of pushed people away.
Yeah.
And again, like to fall back into those habits, I feel like it is to accept that person as, oh yes, this character is me, like I am that person still, which isn't a way to lose the game. You can't lose the game by becoming addicted to drugs or drinking again.
It just ends up in some shitty outcomes.
Yes, it reconfirms
the bias that everyone has
all
against
these characters.
you.
This bias that everyone has against you, and for me that's kind of like it's a game over without the actual game over scene. In a sense, you've lost a fight there that's been happening with yourself internally.
The moral damnation is a moral loss.
Mm-hmm. Which that's what a lot of Disco Elysium is it's a lot of
trying to make the right choice.
Yeah, it's a lot of internal struggle, and whether it's like loss or triumph is up to you, I guess. Which again, you can choose to reflect it through gameplay, whether it's by taking said drugs or drinking or agreeing with these people's opinions of you through dialogue. So it's like it's all very intertwined, both thematically and like gameplay wise, mechanically, I guess.
Yeah, and so that ties into the skill tree as well, which you'll be able to explain far better than I would, and how you can really capitalize on indulging and relapsing or trying to steer away from it.
Yeah, so the skill tree, it's essentially you're leveling up your character's personality, and the little sides of his personality that kind of ping in the conversation and provide their own input, to the point where it almost seems like they are their own characters. Like again, electrochemistry is your character's, it's kind of your character's sense for substance abuse and what those substances do to your understanding of how drugs work or alcohol works, or
Right, and then with that understanding, your character can then utilize it more to their
yeah,
advantage.
or to yeah, and it helps you recognize when the people you're speaking to are not like entirely sober, and you can use that to take advantage of the conversation, making them slip up and say an option or a line of dialogue that they otherwise wouldn't have if you hadn't caught them out. You can put them in a
Yeah,
really uncomfortable spot where they're more inclined to just agree with what you're saying just to change the conversation.
because you've got that bit of leverage. Yeah.
Yes. And that can only come from having a previous history of alcohol abuse, or
Yeah,
substance
quite
abuse.
literally takes one to know one.
Yes, yes. So, but the thing is with electrochemistry is the way it describes like all these things. It almost makes it sound like so good to take these things. Like the option is there, and it makes it sound so attractive to like fall into these habits again, because you just know that like your character would really enjoy it. It's something that's familiar to them, less scary. It's almost like coming back home, because you're someone who is who has no recollection of who they are. It would be like the first piece of yourself that you've put together again, which isn't to be an addict. Um,
And then all the memories that come from that as well, because if that wasn't clear when we were talking about the absolutely batshit bender that the game starts off on, you forget everything.
yes, exactly. It's almost like it is trying to, well, I would say it is absolutely trying to convince the player to try and come around to that way of thinking, to make it sound like it's a good option, which is kind of your character making excuses for himself as to why he should fall back into these bad habits and take the easy path, because the game does mechanically reward you by giving you stat bonuses, like I said before.
And so ethically, do you feel like that's the game being like, yeah, drug use can be good, or is it a narrative? This character in particular has a lot of experience with drug use, and that is their, I want to say safe space, but I don't feel like it's right, but their comfort zone.
It's like, in terms of the story, your character is a functional alcoholic. He is at his peak when he's like high or drunk, and that's he spent a lot of his time on the force as a detective. He's got the highest number of like cases solved ever, at like 200 to 300 cases solved total. Right. Whereas it is considered an incredible high distinction for a detective to get maybe like 20 cases solved in their entire time on the force. So you are an unstoppable machine as a detective, but the only way you've managed to pull through all of it is by being a high functional alcoholic and drug addict to keep you going, which I'm sure is like,
it is absolutely a thing that, I mean, it's something that I have witnessed in people in my own life being very capable alcoholics, but regardless, still alcoholics.
Mm-hmm. And in saying that, it's like you have people like on the force who recognize you for the good work you've done, and the fact that you are quite literally a fucking like a superstar, honestly, at doing this.
But on the flip side, there's also like, you are a fucked up person inside. Yeah.
Yeah, they all like, part of them deeply resent you, maybe even hate you, but they know the person that you were when you started, and they know the person you could be if you just got better. But they also feel inferior to you because essentially you've distanced yourself from them in the fact that like
you're kind of above
you
them.
are fully capable.
Yeah,
you are fully capable of doing all these things, so why should you even listen to them in the first place?
And then obviously there's also that very scary feeling of, this person is absolutely sloshed every day at work and still perform better than I do. And that is a very confronting feeling. And a lot of people react to that with hostility, like in real life.
Yes. So you actually have your original squad that was supposed to solve the case with you come to visit you. like a couple days into the game, they don't tell you that it's them. They just, obviously, they assume that you know who they are.
Yeah.
But you actually don't recognize them anymore. So when you don't recognize them, the first thought that comes to them is that you're drunk again. You're already drunk. Or you're already high.
Yeah.
And you don't even know who they are. Whereas, like, in terms of my first playthrough, it was far from the case. Like, all I saw was just these random people that I didn't know.
That rocked up.
They were
and said
very
your
angry
name.
with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were very angry with me when I, like, kind of didn't understand why they were talking to me to begin with. But your character he knows that he's maybe seen them somewhere before, or that they just seem familiar to him. He just can't quite place it. But they're already openly hostile to you, and they refuse to kind of elaborate because they
think you're fucking with them. Like, yeah, you've been like this for ages.
They think you're fucking with them. Mm-hmm. So again, like, in terms of gameplay, like, there were some interesting moments where there were characters that spoke to me so jovially or aggressively that it was confusing, which I think is perfectly in line with kind of how you would actually react in that situation. The fact that you don't know these people. But I mean, in my future playthroughs, I now know who they are, so I have that added context of they know me, but I don't know them, but I as the player know them.
Yeah.
And how that interacts with the story. So again, like before, I was saying, now I can understand why some characters are very frustrated with you. But for me, in the first playthrough, it was just like, man, like everyone is just fucking sick of me. It's like, they don't believe in me. I'm a fucking joke to them. This game is just like constantly throwing dirt in my face whenever I keep trying to like make progress. But it made those little victories all the more satisfying for me. To get those like chance rolls, to get lucky and make some sort of breakthrough, whether it was in your character's own story or solving the case. Like, for me, it was more worthwhile to do that sober. Whereas I felt like the experience would have been cheapened by taking the easy way. Even though it's not necessarily an extreme benefit to take drugs or to drink for the stat boosts, it is a way to kind of turn the game in your favor, though. I wanted to overcome all obstacles thrown at me with the skills that I gained myself, rather than to have it gifted to me for a brief period of time and ultimately have it mean nothing. Because at the end, again, as I say, the character, like, your squad, like, this is spoilers for the end of the game, by the way, after you've solved the case and you've returned back to Martinez and you're about to call it in, your old squad essentially ambushes you, in terms of, like, kind of a pseudo intervention, really, and they kind of reflect on all of your behavior that's happened across the entire time of your playthrough. So if you were someone that had, like, chose to engage with drugs or alcohol, they will comment on that. They will say, like, they can tell you're drunk right now, they can smell it on you. And your partner, Lieutenant Kim Kitsuragi, he will either back you up or he'll only confirm their suspicions, depending on the choices you made, obviously.
Yeah.
So again, you might have solved the case, but you've completely lost the trust of your friends and your colleagues who respected you. And now that was their last chance that they gave you to try and prove to them that you can be better. And either you fail them or you prove that maybe there's something there to hold on to.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
Yes, exactly. And like, you don't even, again, in my playthrough, they never reveal that that you know them. You can kind of hint that there is some history there, but at least in my first playthrough, they never told me. I'm not sure if there's a way to get them to confess before they do this intervention at the end of the game.
Right.
There are 3 individuals total. One of them was your, like, actual, like, partner on the force, So he's the one who's most hostile to you because he's had to put up with the most shit.
Yeah.
He's had to put up with you for like several years at this point, and it's made him severely, incredibly depressed. And he has like cluster headaches now because of you.
That's always fun.
There's another one who is on the force, not necessarily your partner, but she's still on your squad, and she's a little more forgiving of your actions. She's kind of the middle ground, I would say. Like, she still disapproves of the person that you were, but she's more inclined to believe
you can do better
or give you a chance. Yes. And then there is this consultant who isn't necessarily part of the squad. He's like a social consultant or something like that.
Right.
Not necessarily like a cop or anything. Who was there on like for personal reasons, like to show his son the town and all that kind of stuff, but also to kind of monitor you like medically and psychologically. So he can, while he can confirm that like you've had this lapse of memory from drinking so hard, he can also kind of allude to whether that's just continued behavior of you just messing your body up with alcohol and drugs,
yeah, destroying yourself.
That you've literally had this medical episode, and for some reason now you're starting to turn your life around, and maybe it's a way to kind of repair what's been broken, because obviously, again, your character has done all this like self-harm essentially because he's he's been through this heartbreak that he just can't get rid of. He can't get over it, like whatever it was, and for whatever reason, it just destroyed him. He could never recover from it, so he hides away in that. It's like there's this breakthrough now because you've completely forgotten like that heartbreak, and now maybe there's something to build from that point to be a better person.
Yeah.
That's why I said before at the beginning, it's kind of like it's like a game over without the game over screen, because while you've solved the case, you've lost everyone. You could either potentially lose like the last few people that care about you or give a shit about you, or recognize you for actually being competent at your job, or you can maybe rekindle something there out of like almost nothing. It also shapes Kim's perspective of you, whether he comes to respect you as a detective for the fact that you have just simply pushed through and persevered, or that you've somehow managed to get by and scrape by through unconventional methods. It really changes the way that he talks about you, and he'll defend you regardless. But still, there is this like disappointment there to know that you haven't changed at all. And for me, that was like the added victory of beating the game, was to like essentially prove all those people wrong. Even though there was nothing to prove, I guess, like at the time, because I had no idea who those people were, but it only made it more satisfying, for lack of a better term, to know that like everything was against me from the beginning. I somehow managed to push through at the end without like relying on those crutches.
And that's so interesting, because obviously when you start off having no idea who these people are, and even towards the end having barely any idea who these people are, still wanting to be like, yo, I'm not a completely horrendous person, please, thanks.
Yes, exactly. And that's like the one saving grace, I think, for the protagonist, because otherwise they're just a living human catastrophe. It's almost hard to play through the game as that character. Like, there's points where you, the player, are going to like detest some of his past history, and you're just like, what the fuck?
Yeah, because like we were saying before, if you choose to relapse, you get little memories coming back from that and from other actions as well.
Yeah.
And unlocking those little bits of memories, some of those are devastating.
They are absolutely devastating. And then you only fall into it harder, either because your character is almost addicted to the hurt and addicted to the memories of those experiences he's trying to escape from. It's a vicious cycle of him not personifying, romanticizing this tragedy that's happened to him in the past, to the point where it's this all-consuming,
completely impossible to replace, and so immensely devastating when it is something he can't replace.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I honestly would like to try a playthrough where I just go full on party mode with it, but every time I have tried, it just feels wrong. Like, to me personally, it feels
Really?
wrong. Like, I feel like I've fucked up.
Because your moral code just does not fuck with that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, it's different for every other player, I guess. I think it's more in terms of if you're the kind of person who really engages with the story, like, I guess, vicariously playing as your character.
Yeah, if you're playing as the character or playing as yourself, yeah.
Yeah, choosing the options that you think they would pick versus options you would choose as yourself. And I played more as myself in my first playthrough, I think.
Interesting, because I'm quite the opposite. Depending on the game, a lot of RPGs are very much blank slate for you to project yourself onto, but a lot of them are like what you're describing, where you are specifically role-playing as this specific character and their history. I feel like I tend to be a bit of a mix. Like, I want to set them on the best path that I can, but also like I do get into the character and I'm like, but what would they actually do?
Yeah, I mean, you can play through the entire game without even knowing what you look like, so your character portrait in the bottom left will just remain blank for the entire time. And obviously your character has a name. You can choose whether or not to accept it, or to kind of conceptualize a new one for yourself. So again, you can kind of disassociate the character from, like, the actual...
From the history.
The actual character. The character from the character. The character from their story, and kind of self-insert your own personality into them.
And I guess it's kind of also giving the player character a choice to start fresh as well, even though there is still that baggage from the past surrounding him. I mean,
yes.
None of it's in his head anymore, so, give it a new, fresh take. Exactly.
It was kind of like, when I played the game for the first time, I definitely played it like a blank slate kind of style, but then as I got to know, like, all the demons that the character has been dealing with, it kind of ended up being less me playing as myself and more so me playing as Harry Dubois, like the actual protagonist.
Yeah.
Kind of regaining some semblance of himself, like, towards the end. For the most part of my playthrough, just being completely erratic with no real sense of personality or identity. And then maybe towards the end did I only just kind of start to grasp the character as themselves, which I think is kind of in theme with how the days go by as you learn more and more and you kind of uncover these truths and confront them, and you can choose to accept that, oh yes, I was this person, but now I'm trying to do something different this time, or be better about it, or be the exact same, depending on the choices you make.
Yeah.
So.
And I think, like, that's also a really fun thing to play that a lot of games don't do. You get a lot of exposition at the start normally, so you know who your character is, and then you learn more as you go. But going in knowing nothing and then building up tiny bits of information as you go, and a lot of that information you can miss, because I mean there's so much text in Disco.
There is. Let me see the actual word count while you continue.
Oh man. But yeah, there's so much text in Disco, and not only that, so like you can miss it just through gameplay. You can just go a different direction and miss that little snippet of information. But even if you just kind of skimming through a lot of the text, especially if you're not doing like Varg did when he streams Disco and reads it all out.
Yep.
It is very easy in that wall of text to miss something that is relatively minor. It can be like one sentence, but can be very revealing about the character.
Exactly. Yeah. 100% agree. Word count is about like 1 million words long is a quote here.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Can't believe I read through it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like what the longest book I've read is, because 1 million words.
And about 90 hours long in terms of gameplay if you're really taking your time with it, or 30 hours if you're rushing.
Let's see. So I think
Which, let's see my hours in Disco.
Okay.
176 hours.
Damn. That's
Yeah.
up there with like my most played games. Yeah, okay, so the longest book I've probably read would have been Inheritance from the Aragon series, and that's about 280,000 words. And that's, I'm gonna say, about 700, 800 pages. So, a playthrough of is that the entire game or just one playthrough?
That is one playthrough.
Yeah, so
30 hours if you're rushing.
One playthrough of Disco Elysium is then, I don't know, so what is that times 4? 3,200 pages.
I believe I've completed at least 3 playthroughs, so...
He's read a lot of unfinished
books. I've read a lot of words, and I've said them 3 times.
Oh, man.
At the very
least. That's a lot of reading.
Yeah, honestly, every time... I feel like Disco Elysium, while I enjoy the game so very much, it's also, like, the hardest for me to stream.
Yeah, no, I can't do games like that on stream. I can't focus on like reading shit out, doing all the voices as well, and then keeping up with the regular stream banter and everything. Nah, it's exhausting.
At least at the very least, when I streamed it, people could choose to engage with it as much as they want.
Yeah.
So that's a comfort. Because it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot to read through.
That's fair. And I think it's definitely the sort of game I would either be playing on my own at a very slow pace because it sounds like a lot, or watching someone with a very nice voice play through.
I mean, it's fully narrated now, which has been a godsend.
True, with the special edition.
Yes, so right now in my current playthrough, I'm playing the game where the characters are narrated, but I myself and my thought bubbles are not narrated. So I think it's improved the way that I engage, maybe not so much engage, but kind of react to how other characters respond, because now I kind of have some notion of like how exactly they're feeling and how exactly they've reacted, and now I can kind of...
Yeah, the intonation goes a long way.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting. Maybe I'll give that another shot. I mean, okay, so going into like a bit of a fun fact section. So Disco was banned in Australia for
yes,
a couple of years. I can't remember why. Do you remember the exact reason?
It was
the drug use?
It was banned for not necessarily just the drug use, but rather the fact that you get stat bonuses and benefits from the drug use. And I think also one debated topic was you give or have the option to give a child drugs in order to build rapport with them. Good old Kuno. That's the character.
Amazing.
Kuno's like a 10-something-year-old kid who's clearly on drugs already.
Oh god.
You are tasked with finding more for him and giving it to him to kind of build trust with him.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can understand why people are not the biggest fan of that, but I think also showing morally dubious things, especially in the light of Disco, where it's like, you're not doing a good thing, but it does get the job done.
Yes.
Is important. I think it's a realistic representation of how things go. But in terms of like other games in Australia that got unbanned, RimWorld was unbanned like a month ago.
I didn't even know it got banned to begin with until I saw the news that it got unbanned. I was like, wait, hang on, what?
Because I wanted it for ages, and I originally had it through a friend's Steam library, through Steam sharing, and played it like a little bit. And then I was telling Sonia about it. I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to pick up RimWorld, but it was banned. And I was like, it's probably, for all like the child slavery and ripping out all your prisoners' spines and all that awful shit. And literally the day after I was talking to her about that, when I opened Steam, I got the notification, RimWorld's back in Steam, baby.
So I'm reading up the reason as to why the review board refused classification for RimWorld. It was related to the drug-taking mechanics of the game. Again, Australia has this weird stance on drugs.
It's very funny because we are a very drugged up country.
Yeah, literally. Quite literally.
The government stance on drugs is a lot, especially in Victoria.
Yeah, so it was... the game mechanic ultimately provides disincentives related to drug-taking behavior to the point where regular drug use leads to negative consequences such as overdose, addiction, and withdrawal. This greatly hinders players' progress, as characters will succumb to addiction and must deal with long-term negative impacts. Whereas, again, taking drugs in RimWorld has its own benefits at the cost of long-term negative effects, obviously, because they're drugs. That's how drugs work. That's how the abuse of drugs work. But for some reason, Australia is just like, no, let's not have this discussion.
And that's, I think, a thing I've spoken a lot about on my streams is media literacy. That like a lot of people will be like, oh, you showed this thing in your movie series, whatever, and because you showed it, you are endorsing it, which is not how that works. Like if you show some sort of assault, that isn't necessarily being like, okay, yeah, assault's good. Like, you can have characters, even protagonists, that have very questionable morals. There are reasons that people really like Deadpool. Aside from the reason that most people like Deadpool, which is like the fourth wall breaking, the witty, he's like a little bit edgy, but because he is morally dubious, he does some shitty things to ultimately end up doing the right thing.
Yes, again, I think like going back to Disco Elysium as well, morally dubious actions such as, you know, giving a child drugs, even with the context that at somehow, some way, this is going to only help your investigation because, for the most part, Kuno is probably the one who spent the most time around this body, just chucking rocks at it, by the way, while on drugs. I think he also threw a rake at it and a bicycle, maybe, for fun. Anyway.
Meth, not even once.
Yeah, meth, literally not even once. Sounds like a standard Australian evening with some...
Just a regular Saturday night in the Melbourne CBD.
Minus kangaroos watching all of this unfold in the darkness.
Oh yeah, and the koalas dropping from the skyscrapers knocking you the fuck out.
Of course.
Yeah.
But like, I think, like, how else are we gonna have... Like, honestly, my perception of a recovering drug addict or, you know, alcoholic, a high-functioning alcoholic, was changed. I think I knew a little bit more about what that experience might be like because I was able to engage in these topics in a video game.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that video games do really well, in particular better than movies and TV can, is that internal dialogue, how a character thinks, especially when you're put in the seat of controlling that character. And doubly so with Disco Elysium, where you see every single thought that goes through his head pop up as a line of text. I think that can be very insightful in a way that movies and TV can do, but I think video games are much better at doing.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you because even if you are someone who plays through the game not engaging with any of those kind of behaviors, you still see the consequences and the aftermath of what it's done to people, and you yourself, like not even just you, just the town that it takes place in, Martinez, is this very rundown town where pretty much like failure just resonates with all these people who have been mostly forgotten about, and all they have is these vices to get them through the day. So I've come to sympathize with them on a more personal level, but also there's that discussion of just how poor infrastructure and kind of the failure of I would say government bodies to kind of to kind of help these people recover and get out of this spot, because sometimes it just gets so bad that like you have to, you literally have to hit rock bottom before anything gets better. I think that's like
Yeah.
I've seen that, like I've read a lot of stories where that's what it takes for someone to kind of either completely fall into oblivion or to decide, shit, like I gotta change
This is
something.
when I start climbing. Yeah.
Yeah, this is it. This is do or die. So again, like to have that to have that internal battle kind of stick with you throughout the entire game, I think was a very great way of having the player engage with those topics in a safe way too.
Yeah.
You know,
And I think it's also very important that they didn't choose to have that resolve at the end of the story either. You don't, if you go completely clean throughout the game, it's not like those urges go away.
exactly. And
You still have
actually,
to deal with that.
yeah, I was going to say like, because the game literally just ends as well. After that kind of pseudo intervention, you basically go back to your precinct, but you don't actually see what happens. You don't know if maybe despite all of that, your character's fallen back into those habits outside of your control afterwards.
There's no conclusion. It's just
there is no
that
conclusion.
bit of the story is over.
Yep, exactly. So it's very, it's not like, oh, suddenly you're better now and you don't have to worry about any of these things again, because these people that care about you are still very, very concerned that this may only be temporary and it's only a matter of time before you rely on those things again.
Yeah.
But we don't see that, so we can only hope that maybe something has changed. Maybe.
It's like, yeah, life goes on.
Yeah, so
better
like
and
the
for worse.
conversation just remains open for discussion, which I love that about Disco Elysium, is you don't...
Yes, it's got a lot of discussion points without strictly answering them.
Yeah, you solve the case, but you have so much more questions about where these characters are going to go next, or what's going to happen to like the state of the world, because it's very much, it takes place where things have already happened. Like all the great social and political upheavals have happened already. The atrocities and all of that kind of stuff have are like 50 years in the past now, but people are still slowly recovering, if at all recovering, from what has happened in the world. And again, on a more personal level, it's you are still recovering from being that person that you were. You can only hope that maybe the character that you've built or the character that you've fallen into is either going to continue those habits or to forego them completely, even if it's a struggle.
Yeah.
Which again is the whole point.
And I think that perspective, or that angle of, yeah, it's 50 years past, all the massive political upheavals that they go through. It's very representative of the real world as well, that the world still is recovering. I mean, the civil rights movement in the US, was the 60s. So that's 60 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still very much healing from that. And as of late, definitely going backwards on a lot of those things. Very similar with apartheid and South Africa, where a lot of people in the 2010s were like, yo, okay, like we're not making any progress. But in 2010, they'd only been out of apartheid for not even 20 years. There's a lot of healing to do and a lot of recovery to make. And that's the scary thing, because for you and I, who have only seen the world after those events, and to us, it's like, yeah, it's always been like this. It seems so crazy to be like, yo, 60 years down the line, things might not be okay. That's an entire lifetime.
It is, yeah. An entire lifetime for things to just even get slightly better.
Yeah.
If at all, again, like it could go just completely backwards, which, I mean, we've kind of seen with the whole, abortion debate.
Yeah. Let's not get too political, but we are in a very rough political state at the moment. I mean, we had yesterday the Australian Women's Health Minister speak in an anti-abortion rally. So
oh, I did not know that. That is
I
horrifying.
only found out about that on the train home today. So yeah, We've got great people in charge. Anyway, I think that's a wonderful point to cap it off.
Yeah, to
Because
cap
if
it
we
off.
start getting into politics, we're not going to shut up.
Yeah, 100%. And then we're just gonna go down the rabbit hole of real world politics and Disco Elysium politics. Oh no, I'm not ready for that. Not again.
No, that is an episode of its own that requires a lot of preparation.
100%. But it was great to talk about. Yeah. It was great to talk about kind of that side of things in terms of Disco Elysium, because again, it is only. I won't say it's a side note. It's just one of many important themes that the game has to offer. I highly recommend anyone who's listening to give the game a shot. You know, whether you're passively engaging with what's kind of being discussed, or you find a little bit more of it resonates with you. I think anyone who plays the game will take something away from it, even if it's just something minute.
Agreed. And I think Disco's really great in that it's got so many different layers, and that even if you only engage with it on a surface level, you still get a massive amount out of it. And then the more you engage with it, as Varg has plenty, the more and more you get out of it.
I think it will definitely broaden your horizons and your scope of understanding some of these topics, for sure.
You got any other games to recommend that are in that vein?
Let's see. Other games. Off the top of my head right now, Fallout New Vegas. I think if you... there is the base game, but it's the DLC, particularly the final one, where things come to a head in terms of, ideologies clashing. Because that's pretty much what it is. One of the final encounters is a clash of ideologies.
Yeah.
And the character that you've built up until that point, you can kind of side with one of those ideologies, or maybe wipe the slate clean completely for maybe something new. Just to kind of maybe give a little bit of context, essentially.
No, save the context for another episode.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Yeah. But if you got anything you want to plug at the moment, or just regular Twitch old stuff?
Standard Twitch stuff. You can find me on twitch.tv/KidVarg. I have a Twitter. I have an Instagram that I don't use. But yeah, no, that's about it. I mean, if you are kind of one who wants to maybe learn a little bit more about Disco Elysium, or just kind of see what the game's about, you'll probably see me streaming it at some point.
Yes, I can highly recommend all of Varg's content, but particularly I've really enjoyed his Disco Elysium streams. Like I've said, it's honestly not the sort of game I would play, but it is the game I've very much enjoyed watching, and through your lens, but also through my own, and engaging with it with you has been really, really fun.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter and you'll see me just retweeting all sorts of non-contextual things about Disco Elysium.
Oh, so much Disco Elysium stuff. I've learned a good chunk about Disco Elysium just from the shit you've retweeted.
Hell yeah! No, I'm glad someone's at least seeing it, maybe, because I whenever I retweet, I'm like, yes, this is life changing. Someone look at this now.